Karen and Barbara Fields, talking about the notion of the fallacy of the social construct of race, and as opposed to race being a starting point that contributes to or creates racism, that rather race is a function of racism, and it grows out of racism, and racecraft is the practice or the perpetuation of racism that creates racial identities. So given that as a framework, racism and racecraft in America, and particularly in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, I'd like to ask our panelists a series of questions about their perspectives on these issues, and at a certain point we'll stop and allow some questions for the audience. And just so I'm clear on time, I have 5:16. How long are we?
I think we start question and answers about 6:30.
6:30, okay, so it's getting to like 6:26 and it feels like I'm still midstream. You want to
I got you.
give me one of those? Okay. So, the socially constructed part of race is not that it is unreal, but that it is invisible in its construction, and that it is being done by people all the time in their action and understanding. People, including activists and organizers and educators, often operate off of this characterization of race as a social construct. In you all's opinion, in what ways is this a useful characterization, and in what ways is it not useful? So,
okay, well, I think there's a few elements to that. So when we talk about race as a social construct, when we talk about that particular, that phrasing is interesting because we, as people of color, every day we see that race, sure, we hear it's a social construct, but the effects that it has on your day-to-day lives, it's a result of the social construct, but it's also a very real thing. I think,
yeah, I'd have to agree. Because whenever we keep using that phrase like, oh, race is just a social construct and we shouldn't subscribe to it, and it makes it seem like it's this thing that's just there. It doesn't really have any sort of power, and there's no sort of hierarchy of privilege involved in it, and there is, and it's very real. People of color know that. We experience it, we're forced to experience it. No one really wants to feel oppressed, but like if you're of color, you're literally going to feel that oppression in one way or another. And so just simply saying that race is a social construct and therefore we just need to just, I don't know, bypass it or just not subscribe to it or not give it so much weight is just negating the experiences of millions of people.
Yeah, going off of both of those 2 points, looking at race as a social construct is very problematic because in essence, it says that race is static and that the social construction is static. If you ignore it, it'll just go away. But actually, race is an economic and social or political construct too, where a lot of our social realities have been a product of public policy, of economic policy for centuries, and that's how it's reified itself for centuries.
and so, are there ways in which this social construct and acknowledging it, maybe even being governed by it, are there ways in which it's helpful?
I think recently it's only been helpful in the sense that it's given rise to, like we've started to notice more and more the effects that race as a social construct has on us. There wasn't all this research before about how race and racism and racecrafting were affecting Black, brown communities before this became such a big issue in the media. Then once it started to, once we started to see so many Black bodies being murdered by police officers, abused on college campuses. Then you start to see a lot more research into how banks behaved towards people of color when they applied for loans. Then you start to see much more research into how police officers interact with the members of their communities. I think while it does highlight all of the terrible things that have happened in Black communities, it also does bring it to light so that we can work to change those things. So, I mean, it's a positive, but I wouldn't even go as far as calling it that.
So I would say that there, well, it's always been useful. Like construction of race has always been useful, just not for certain people, right? It's created this, it's a hierarchy, and it was economic and political, as Gabrielle said, and so now, and it's not even like a new thing, like racial constructions create communities for a lot of the political and economic reasons, and they can galvanize a whole movement, which we're seeing now. Previously we weren't alive to see it, but now we're really seeing how these communities can band together based on not necessarily entirely on the basis of their skin color, but it doesn't hurt. It certainly helps knowing that you have these similar identities and similar experiences, and wanting and being in a position where you can do something and make some sort of effective change, whether it just be putting it into social media and then back and bring about these studies that Louise brought up. So it was always really beneficial it continues to be very beneficial for certain groups of people, and I think people of color are now trying to take back some of that power. Again, it's not like a new thing. I think now we're seeing how people of color are starting to again, I keep saying sorry, I feel like I'm stupid. Are trying to use it sort of like maybe reappropriate it for just to make sense of the society that we're in now, if that makes sense.
Gabrielle, you see it as being useful and having some practical benefits to it?
Kind of. So I feel like Black people, we've always realized that race is a social construct, but we've tried to control the mechanisms through which this social construct can control our lives in various ways. Like you look at the Harlem Renaissance, and a lot of the intellectual clout that came out of that, people really wanted Black people to be viewed differently. So what we find in this generation that's drastically different from like 100 years ago is that we've unmasked whiteness. And that is what has really led to us really critiquing the system. You can always change how Blackness is defined and Blackness works, but once you unmask whiteness and it's no longer rendered invisible, you're able to see, oh, actually, this policy was passed and it helped white people and we didn't even know about this. So, and it also gave us the ability to have this cross coalition because white people now see that they have privilege and that they see that they have these unearned benefits. So now they want to work with Black people with Black Lives Matter in a fundamentally different way than they did during the 1960s. So it's been this social construct has been useful now, but only because we've unmasked whiteness.
So, in talking about that, I'm thinking about Ta-Nehisi Coates' latest book, and the use of language about Black body and the destruction of Black body, or referring to individuals who believe they are white, and so that it kind of taps into the language that's being used. And so, can you talk a little bit, Gabrielle, about how you see and perceive the Black Lives Matter movement taking advantage of an understanding of the social construct of race?
I guess going back to talking about Coates' book about Black bodies, I feel like we're able to point to the injustices much more readily, and get the recognition from the white community that this is actually happening. I mean, we have photographs of lynchings. We know that police brutality has been occurring in this country for a century and more, but now that we have that video footage, we're able to use that to mobilize movements, because now we see that the social construction has political ramifications and has ramifications for violence as well.
Kelsey, do you see ways in which the Black Lives Matter movement has pushed back against the notions of race as a social construct?
Pushed back? Can you extrapolate a little bit? What do you mean by pushed back?
Sure. How have they said this is whack? Or have they?
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm having trouble with the question because I'm not sure if that's happening or if that's really even on the agenda. Perhaps it is. I'm just not knowledgeable of it. It seems then again, I don't know all of their rhetoric, but it seems that the goal is to bring attention to the violence against Black bodies, and the photographic evidence, that's not new either. Like Rodney King was taped, but I think the difference now is that we always have our phones in our hands, and so now we're in this position of, if we see it, we can actually hold these people accountable. They're no longer just like willy-nilly go about it. It's like no longer socially acceptable. Maybe like traditionally, it's a whole different story. And so I think now it's not. I feel like Black Lives Matter isn't necessarily it's not necessarily pushing back against the construction of race. I would say it seems it's pushing back against the acceptability of continuing to blatantly put people of color in their place, and to blatantly assert your privilege and your power as not even just as a cop, but I would say it also highlights that white people can no longer just do it, period. Like it's not, you can't be held, like you're going to be held accountable more so. We're just now seeing, I feel like we're just seeing it more so with cops, but like Missouri, those football players were like, you can't do this anymore, this is not happening. And he resigned. And it wasn't just entirely the football players, I mean there were other issues involved, of course.
There was a graduate student said, I ain't eating.
Right, yeah, so there wasn't just the
Well,
football players. But I think that it's not so much about against the construction, it's more of, it's against the, and I feel like this speaks a little bit to what Gabrielle was saying. It really is pushing back against the continuation and the power of white power and of white privilege.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter, it depends on the social construction of race. You can't go and interrupt a Bernie Sanders rally or Hillary Clinton rally saying that Black Lives Matter and saying we have these demands if you reject that blackness isn't a thing, or you reject that whiteness isn't a thing in itself. So they depend on those social constructions to ask for political benefits now.
So and I think that gets a little bit to what the article was talking about, and maybe even challenges that, it's not a thing. It's racism that's the issue, and Black Lives Matter exists because of racism. And race is a function of that. You all touched on something though, and Louis, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, is, this notion that a university was impacted by the movement of people on issues of race or racism, however you perceive it. How do you all see universities perpetuating the myths around racism, around race? And do they have a role in changing that stuff?
Okay, well I think,
You have to like gear up, like, let me get ready.
Alright, well I mean,
I guess
so,
my scholarship gonna be in This is being recorded too.
I think I react the way I do because at BU we're a little sensitive to institutions, because you asked about whether institutions should be involved in, universities particularly as an institution should be involved in discussing the issues about race, but not just discussing them, because we have these discussions all the time, right? We had Be United last year. On the Alianza we have these kinds of conversations all the time. Members of UMOJUS have this conversation all the time.
But is that student groups or is that
Those
the
are student
university?
groups, and that's what I'm getting at. So those are student groups, right? So we, as students of color on this campus, are constantly pushing for something to change, something to happen. The university continues to say, well, it's up to you guys, the students, to do something about it. So it's kind of like this catch-22 where we're asking the university to, do things that are more inclusive for us. And what those specific things could be, I mean, that's an entirely different conversation. But I think, yeah, there's definitely a place for universities, institutions, and for us as college students, that would be, Boston University, to take a larger role and a stronger stance on being more inclusive, on hiring more professors of color, on having more students of color here, and not just middle-class suburban students of color or students that went to very good schools, which if you're lucky to do that, that's great. That's what gets you to these places. But it's also a matter of every student, not every student, but students of color having that opportunity, that fair chance to get to places like BU, to schools like these, and not just when you get there, be there, but also feel like you actually belong there, see professors who look like you, who have your same or similar lived experiences, and can kind of help you map out what you're going to be doing here for the next 4, 6, 10 years, depending on what programs you're involved in.
Do you want to? It's,
Okay.
okay, I don't care. Okay, you can go.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, I'll speak for my experiences at BU, but I just think that it's very problematic when an institution does not support not only the black academic faculty. Like, having black academics on this campus is very powerful for showing students that this is actually a place where you belong, but also investing in the black academics' mind, like students' minds, not people who are just going into science or trying to go work for a corporation, but people who are actually trying to change and to resist the system. There's a joke that I have with some of my friends. I'm like, they have the code words for the black people who write in their essays who come to the school, because it seems like we're on this very oppressive university structure, this huge monolithic system, and people don't want to resist it. They just want to get through their 4 years, go get a corporate job, and leave all this behind. They don't want to resist the change, and that's changed. There are like a few people here that actually want to resist the system, but I believe the university has a huge role in contributing to the environment where black people don't feel safe resisting this institution, where we had to call out our dean of students who is a black man, for not saying something on behalf of Ferguson. That is inexcusable. He was afraid of that institution, he just didn't want to say it. So we have this, the university is just important for these kinds of changes, and we need our faculty to be honest with themselves, and we also need the student body to be honest with themselves and the type of change they want to produce, and not just go through these 4 years and get hired by a corporation and not contribute anything back.
So I want to shift from kind of larger to more personal, and again, looking at this article and the book, it talks about the notion of identity versus identification. Says, identity is how we understand ourselves to be, but identity, or identification rather, is how we are perceived by others. So, you can think of Trayvon Martin as a young boy who played video games and liked Skittles, and and whatever other aspirations that he had for himself and in his life, and that was his identity. But George Zimmerman identified him, his identification was as a young black man who was a threat. And so my question is, are there identities that trump identification for black people? So does Oprah Winfrey's identity trump her identification as a black woman? Does Drake's identity trump his identification as a soft rapper?
I need you to
I'm sorry.
Well, I think specifically Drake is never going to get rid of his identification. First of all, he's Jimmy from Degrassi.
Where's your Jimmy?
Like, no one is ever going to forget that. So let's start there. And outside, so your other examples are these, these higher up, these very rich black people. I can't even say Americans, because Drake is Canadian. That's another identification. You can't escape that either. And I think that you can't say that, you can't ignore the fact that Oprah is a black woman. You can't ignore the fact that Drake is a black man. And I guess if Drake's identity is that he is a rapper, I don't think he would say he's a soft rapper, because I highly doubt he would say that about himself. Because we're laughing at it. I don't even know why I just said that. I think that there are certain identifications that will trump your identity. Or was your question in the reverse? Are there identities that can trump? No. When it comes to people of color, no. Obama is still being attacked because he's a half black man. Like, that's just, you can't ignore. So I guess that is kind of relevant to what I just said. you can't ignore it. It's there. It's going to be there. He's the president of his country. He and however much weight you put on that, it's pretty crazy. Like runs the country with millions of people. People are still just knocking him down because he's a black man. Like, oh, we have this black man in the White House and he's doing like terrible things. If that's your opinion, it's not mine. And I think that, however, I mean, you can't also know how someone identifies. Like, that's not something that an outside person can know unless you know them personally. So I don't know how these certain, like, higher up black people would identify themselves. But, oh my God, I'm still doing the reverse.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, I'm still doing the reverse. Because I think that is still, I guess the problem I'm having with the question is, I don't know how they identify. Right? Like before you met me, you did not identify as a graduate student, but I think that I would feel like that's a more relevant part of my life than me being a black woman, just right now, because I'm in graduate school, it's hard. But you would have known that unless I said it to you, right? Like I think that's why I'm having trouble answering the question and I'm rambling, because I just don't know how they would identify themselves. And so my identification, like what their identification is trumping that, just because I don't know them, right?
Yeah, I find it like that question. It makes me think of Melissa Harris Perry's theory about the tilted room through which people perceive you. Like you're not always seen as who you actually are by outside society. And I think like when you're coming through the ranks of power, and that's what Oprah, Drake, and Obama have is power, you're going to be seen through that tilted room. How you project yourself is not necessarily how people will perceive you. But once you get that amount of power, I think you might be able to, you're known for your power and not necessarily your race in all instances. Like Oprah is a black woman, but that's not, nobody pays as much attention to it as they did when she was coming through the ranks. It's still relevant, but it's not the focus anymore. When Barack Obama was running for president, it was very important that he was a black man. It's still important, but now how he governs and his legacy as president of the United States of America is what trumps his identity as a black man. So it's like, once you have power, that's what trumps your identification, your racial identification.
So you want to know if identity trumps identification, right? I think I would agree with you in saying that I don't think identity does trump identification. President Obama's identity should be he's the president of the free world, president of the United States, right? His identification, though, is often he's the first black president. That's how we identify him, rather than the identity that he probably sees for himself, which might include that he's the president of the United States, right? I think the fact that we view him as the first black president instead of the first half black, half white president speaks loudly to the fact that his identification trumps his identity. I think Drake, because he's a soft rapper, probably there's a probably different connotation to him too. But I think even with him, I think of him as a black man, not a half white man. And I think a lot of people think of people of mixed races that way. And I think that speaks volumes to the fact that identification trumps your identity.
And so are there identities that any number of us may have that complicate that identification?
Yeah,
yes, I'm a black man, but I'm also these things, and that the manifestation.
Yeah, I think I can definitely speak to that, because I mean, so my name's Luis Castro, I speak Spanish, my mother's Dominican, my father's Puerto Rican, but I'm black. And that was something that took me the longest time to figure out, especially because Latino culture having so much inherent racism within it, where I remember when we were kids and my sister. I remember when I was a child, we would be filling out censuses, or you'd be filling out what race are you for school, and there would be sometimes you'd see the options would be white, Latino, and black, and so okay, today I check off Latino. But when they take away Latino and it's just white and black, and we're like this weird brown color, and we're like, oh no, what do I do?
Other.
And then we're like, where's the other? Oh, they didn't include the other box. So and a lot of Latino culture inherently goes, well, like, okay, I don't identify as black, so then I must be white, and that's a huge problem because when you're growing up, it takes reading, it takes coming to different atmospheres and getting away from that inherently racist environment for you to realize, like, oh, the diaspora, I'm black. So yeah, I think identity can be something that's very complicated, and that's from my own personal experience. So.
Y'all don't have to answer the question. I'm just saying it's open to be answered if y'all.
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be some identities that can trump your identification.
Well, not Trump, but complicate.
Can complicate. Oh, complicate. Oh, sure. Sexuality can do that. I think that's exciting. Okay. So
Yeah, I was wondering. I'm like, where are we gonna bring up that?
So yeah, sexuality can definitely complicate your identification. So I identify as gay, but I happen to have a very feminine gender presentation, so a lot of people assume that I'm straight. Happened today. Just fine, I don't have a problem with it. But if I had a very masculine gender presentation, I would assume that people would see me as, oh, she's gay, and she's black, but she's a woman. Is she a woman? Dude, not dude. Dude, not dude, right? Like, so that complicates so your sexuality, your gender presentation, and the intersection of those two things can really complicate other people's perceptions of who you actually are, right? Yeah, I'm gonna stop. Yes.
Sure.
Oh, there's gonna be part of
It's
that.
on the same
I know,
thing.
James, but we're gonna get to that later when there's a question and answer period. But save it. We'll be part of that. We'll get back to it. Thank you.
I think wealth complicates your identity as well, especially if you are a part of what's supposed to be the underclass of America. If you have dark skin, so the way people want to see you is always poor if you're black, and if you happen to have any type of money, any type of economic clout, people are, well, how did you get it? Did your father play basketball? Was he, what did he do? And it's this very complex, it's very complicated because people don't want to see you for who you are, and like what you have is just, how did this happen? It's very, it's almost like it doesn't make sense in the reality that someone who is black can also be simultaneously middle class, because that space is reserved for white people in this country. So it's something that wealth can complicate your racial identity.
And so, thinking about, and you have all have spoken to personal experiences. This article talks about this young man who was arrested in the store. And so despite his identity of a possibly middle-class young man who could afford to buy an expensive, I think it was a belt or a belt
It was in
buckle.
Barney's, right?
Yeah,
Barney's.
Barney's. Right, and was arrested. And despite having proof that he could buy it and have a credit card or whatever, he was still arrested. And so I'm wondering, as you all reflect on your personal life experiences and whatever intersectional aspects of your being have complicated your identification, are there experiences that you have had where your identification trumped your identity?
Matt Suter, sophomore year of high school.
Wow.
My debate partner picks me up from my house the morning of one of our tournaments. So I get in the car, he picks me up, he's like, oh, I thought you would live further in the west side, because the west side in Buffalo is, even the west side itself is kind of divided into two sections. There's Elmwood, which is like very middle class, lots of white people, nice homes, right? And then there's the deep west side or the lower west side, which is reserved mostly for a lot of Asian immigrant families and a lot of Latino immigrant families. He tells me that he thought that I lived further in the lower west side, and I go, oh, okay, no, I live right here. I'm in the car at this point, right? but he doesn't stop, and he goes like, oh yeah, like we were so sure that this wasn't the right place that we kept driving, looking for another 452.
Someone did not know the story.
Oh yeah, no, I know you should. I know shit about that too. But and that was a debate partner, the guy who I played soccer with. We were supposed to be friends. But you know, he's at Georgetown studying policy. So
yes, what always sticks out, I'm sure that there have been experiences of my own that I can't recall them right now. What sticks out most for me is, mostly because my dad complains about it a lot, is my father, who is a tall black man. He is well educated. He's a professor, business professor at the University of Virginia. Excellent institution. And that does not exist when he walks into Best Buy in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's getting better now, but when we first moved there and we would go in, I would be with him, we'd like go get like a movie, or I think we need like a new TV this one particular time. And we had like time to kill because I don't know, we just didn't really come home or something. And we were just like wandering around, and I think I noticed it first, but I was like, no, there's like no way this person's following us. I was like, that's like not happening. And it was happening. And my dad obviously noticed before I did, so I guess I said first, but he obviously noticed before I did. And he like turned around and he was like, are you gonna like help me, or are you just going to lag behind us? And the guy was like, oh no, do you need help? And my dad was like, what are you doing? Yes, no, actually I'm fine. Like we're just like trying to pick out the like, TV that we want. And my dad has like this very specific irritated voice and face. It's coming up, it was coming. And I was like, oh, this guy's gonna get it. And I was like, oh, it's not me this time. And yeah, man, my dad is like, he ripped him a new one. He was so mad. He was like, I'm with my kid, like what are you doing? I can't even do it. But yeah, this well-educated man. We were well-dressed too. It's not like we looked a disaster. Right? They think he was wearing like a Brooks Brother button down with his initials on it. Like what even? And we were followed around. And then when we walked out of the store, the security guard checked his receipt to make sure that everything that we were like walking out with, that he like actually like yeah, they're like, we need to check. And he was like, what is this? And I was like, let's talk about this in the car. We get into the car and it turns out that had been happening dozens of times when I wasn't there. And he was like, Kelsey, no one cares that I have a PhD. And I was like, you need to carry on your degree. I literally said, just bring your ID. Just bring both of your degrees, because you are obviously you're higher educated than they are, and just bring them with you. So I'm not gonna do this. I was like, I really think it's gonna help you out though.
Because that's kind of on par like with telling women like, no, wear longer dresses. So you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know what more. I mean, yeah, it's better now, and he's lived there for about 6 years now. But we could not figure out what he could possibly do to get these Best Buy workers to like not follow him around as if he was going to steal something. And there wasn't, because he's a tall black man.
I think
it's just not going to happen.
I think it's interesting too that you bring up the point of like, how he was dressed, because that's certainly something I was always taught as a child.
Respectability politics
you're
101.
You're supposed to be dressed a certain way. Based on the stories
he
you go
followed
to
the
and where you're
rules.
gonna be.
And he still got messed with. Yeah, man.